So thank you again for the introduction, and really thank you for the opportunity. I feel quite honored to be here. I just want to begin by letting letting all the participants know, whether they're here today with us or listening a little bit later through the self-learning program, that this is meant to be a safe space and that all people are welcome here. And I hope that with this presentation today that you'll be able to take something away that you will find personally meaningful. And again, I just want to express my gratitude for the opportunity. When I was diagnosed with cancer more than 20 years ago now, I read about Wellspring and the Coach House in Toronto. And because I was a practicing physician, 3 small children, that center, that support wasn't available to me. And at that time, even, I hoped that at one point I might be able to have some kind of interaction with Wellspring. I had taken an interest in mind-body medicine and was looking for some opportunities to instill my personal interest in my medical practice. And so here I am, more than 20 years later, really grateful for the opportunity I've had to work at Wellspring in the provision of a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy program for cancer. And so really grateful for all the forces that have come together to allow us to have Wellspring in our community and in the broader world now with the entrance of this, the presentations such as this into the airspace. So yeah, really just some gratitude that this might be one of the silver linings of the pandemic, that despite the difficulties and that we may face in meeting the pandemic, that we know that we will get through, and that we might be able to consider those things that will bring us greater learning and benefit as we make our way through. And so the intentions, let me just move through this. Oops. My intentions for the presentation today are to provide an introduction, a brief introduction to mindfulness. As many of you may know, it's a large topic, but I'm hoping that I can present some information in a way that is meaningful to you. The information won't be new. It's really ideas that are not my own, but lessons that I have learned that have been personally valuable to me, and lessons that I've been able to share with some of the people in my groups that I run for anxiety and depression and also for cancer, that I hope might be useful, as useful to you as it had been to some of those participants. And so in saying that, I hope that it will spark curiosity, whether you are new to mindfulness or whether you are a seasoned practitioner, that there might be something that can be personally meaningful to you that will allow you to take away and perhaps introduce a little bit of ease to your being. And so with that, I'll ask you to sit back and we'll get started. And so just some listening. If you can sit quietly after difficult news, if in a financial downturn you can remain calm, if you see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can happily eat whatever's put on your plate, if you can fall asleep without a drink or a pill after a day of running around, if you can always find contentment just where you are, even during a pandemic, you are probably a dog. And so I thought that it might be useful to begin to address some of the conceptions that we might have about what mindfulness is, and move into a discussion about what it isn't, and then some understanding of what might be useful to us. And so mindfulness is no longer an esoteric term as it was when I was introduced to mindfulness more than 20 years ago. And it is my guess that many of you, if not all of you, will have some familiarity with the term as mindfulness has made its way into the mainstream. The difficulty with the larger marketing of mindfulness is that there are certain risks that we bring to sessions such like this, or to the practice of mindfulness, this idea that it will allow us to enjoy this state of perpetual bliss, or that we won't be reactive, that we'll be forever calm. Or if we move into the idea that it involves meditation, that it involves emptying the mind, that our thoughts. And you may also know from the literature, again, we won't have a lot of time to talk about that today, but you may know from the literature that there's growing evidence that mindfulness is beneficial to us, to our immune systems, to the rapidity of aging, to a variety of medical conditions, as well as our everyday functioning. It improves quality of life. And mindfulness has actually been introduced into education, into business, into sport, and even into the military. And there's a growing body not only of evidence of efficacy, so things that we had suspected in terms of its potential benefits, but also with the development of the field of neuroscience and the ability to study what's going on in the brain through MRI, functional MRI. We know that there is indeed a change in the brain, and that this can be correlated with some of the benefits of practices such as mindfulness. Certainly it's a developing field and lots of room for additional study, but you may have some understanding that this might be beneficial for you. And this is true. But it may not be what you think it is. And the risks of this marketing in terms of what it might bring you in terms of perpetual bliss, for lack of a better term, is that it sets us up for failure. And so you might introduce a mindfulness practice, perhaps even introduce a course, and then when you become more familiar of what mindfulness actually involves, you might judge yourself about what it is what it is you thought it would be and what your experience it is. So I thought it would be useful today for us to kind of clarify what it is that mindfulness might bring to you. Okay. And so what I'd like to do now is to begin with a short practice. And so I'm going to invite you to take your seat. And so just taking a position in your chair, or perhaps you're on standing or lying down perhaps. And you might begin by just feeling your feet on the floor, the contact of your feet on the ground, aware of your legs rising up, your seat on the chair, spine rising towards the sky. And if you care to, you might try closing your eyes, but you needn't close your eyes if that's not comfortable for you. You can take a soft, unfocused gaze. And if at any point you feel unsafe, you can just rest. This will just take a couple of minutes. And you can wait for us to come out on the other side. And so closing your eyes, and then bringing your attention to your breath. The sensations of breathing. Breathing in and breathing out. Just this in-breath and just this out-breath. Air moving in And air moving out. Attending to the breath. And now taking 3 breaths in your own time. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes to end the practice. And now before we move into a definition of mindfulness, what I'd like you to consider is what your experience was. What did you notice in that brief practice? You might have noticed calm. You might have noticed that things settled down a little bit. This can sometimes happen. When we take a deep breath in, slow breath out, that can actually bring into action our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the calming part of our nervous system. And so some of you might have noticed that. But others of you may have been more aware of how busy your mind was, how many thoughts were present. Or perhaps you were just aware of the fact that it was difficult to attend to the practice, that you were more aware of planning what you have to do next, how your day will unfold, maybe something tomorrow. Or you may have been influenced by something that happened just before we started this webinar, something that happened this morning, or maybe even a difficult interaction that you had yesterday that you're still going over and over in your mind. Perhaps you notice judging. I can't do this. I'm never going to be able to do this. Or perhaps I wish this would go a little faster. Something about yourself, about me, about the situation. And so we notice that often our mind is busy with planning, with judging. And so this is what we start to notice when we settle in to attend to our breath. And so with mindfulness-based meditation, we begin with this single-pointed focus. So the intention is that we use the focus, our breaths often, but not always. Sometimes it can be sensations in our body. Sometimes it can be movement. But it's this idea that with this intention, this idea that we will attend to one single focus, in doing that, we become aware that our mind is often very active. We begin to see the workings of the mind. And as we become more sensitive to this, more aware of this, we also begin to see how these thoughts influence our actions and our behaviors, really influence how we are in the world. And so the intention of mindfulness is not to become a better meditator, but to recognize our habitual ways of thinking and begin to see how our emotions and our thoughts yank us around, okay, and take us to a different place out of the present moment. And so the possibility of mindfulness is that as we begin to be aware of the influence of our thoughts on our actions, we can intervene, the possibility that we can be different, that we can respond to these thoughts in a different way. And this has been associated with an increase in our well-being. And so one of the most common or earliest definitions in the Western world of mindfulness-based meditation is this one by Jon Kabat-Zinn. It was developed earlier, beginning in the 70s, and has grown since then. And this was a definition that he expanded actually in the 2013. But mindfulness meditation is the awareness that arises when paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. And it was this latter bit, in the service of greater self-understanding, wisdom, and well-being, that he added in 2013. And so mindfulness meditation is about attention training, but it's more than attention training. Okay. It's about this ability of, it's about our cultivating this ability to be different, to be more at ease, to be more responsive to the situation instead of reacting in a way that serves our well-being. Or another way of thinking about it is that mindfulness is the interaction of intention. So this is this idea on purpose. I'm going to purposefully pay attention, and also my attitude. And so as I begin to notice what my thoughts are, where my thoughts go, the kind of thoughts that I have, if I can begin to meet these with a compassion instead of judgment. And so what we begin to notice as we pay attention to our thoughts, that they often involve an element of harsh criticism towards ourselves. So you may have heard people speak about this inner critic. And so the thoughts that we have often don't serve us in a way that is helpful to us. Okay. So again, it's intention. I'm going to purposefully pay attention to where my attention is drawn, what thoughts, with an attitude of compassion, okay, or kindness towards myself, to start to meet this inner critic in a different way, in a way that might serve me better, okay? And so we might ask ourselves, how can this be helpful to us? Why does this matter? And there's interesting work by out of Harvard by authors Killingsworth and Gilbert that really discovered why this is important. And so what they noticed was that through a study that they've done with a large number of participants that has gone on for some time, in which they, through an app on people's phones, on their smartphones, would ask them what they were paying attention to in any given minute, and whether they were content or happy, and where their minds were. And what they found was that 47% of the time, almost 50% of the time, we are not attending to the present moment, that our minds are somewhere else, that we're not actually attending to the people that we're with or in the situation that we're in. And so that in and of itself is significant, because in not paying attention to the present moment, we miss everything that is present. So the smile of a child, the beautiful sunset, or just the knowing that everything in this moment is okay. And what they found further was that when our mind wanders, is that we have this tendency not to go to last night's great meal or to this morning's walk outside, but that our mind has this tendency to go to a difficult place, what has been called the a negativity bias. And so their conclusion in their study was that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And this has been described well in other places, particularly by an author, psychologist named Rick Hansen, who described this situation as a negativity bias. And so what we know from the brain is that we have this tendency, as I said, to concentrate on the negative, to continually survey our situation for things that can potentially harm us. And then the thinking around this is that although this served us well when we were cave people on the savannah, and that we needed to continually survey our environment for dangers, that this now, although it can be protective in helping us to stay alive, that because in the modern world, many of the things that we see as dangers or as threats are imagined. And so we are in this state of perpetual scanning for negativity, but also puts us in this state of reactivity. And this can be interpreted as a real threat, despite the fact that they are often imagined. And this often shows up in terms of past disappointments, of perceived failures, about worry about the future. And we are unable, because we spend our time in these difficult places, it influences how we are in the present world. And so in this way, we might remember, or it may be your experience, how a bad day at the office comes home with us in the evening, and we can be irritable with our families or hard on ourselves, okay? Or the reverse is true. We can have a difficult interaction with our teenager in the morning that follows us to work, and then the smallest criticism at work seems to be so much larger than it might have otherwise been. And so it is without this awareness of our thoughts and our emotions, things that are uninvited, that we live in this imagined world, and that this can cause us considerable amount of stress. So just as one more example, we can see how quickly a cascade of thought can evolve from one imagined thought. And so, for example, the sight of my son's clothing on his floor can quickly put me into, depending on my emotional state, can quickly put me into this tirade of how because he doesn't have together, he's going to be a failure at school. He can't organize himself. If he doesn't succeed at school, he's never going to get a good job. He's going to live in my basement forever, which may or may not be true. But what it does is it takes me out of the present moment into a place that is imagined, that may or may not be true, and really doesn't serve me in the moment. And additionally, what it does is it takes me away from the discussion that I might have with him, this real connection about what is true, about his coursework, or about something that is of concern for him. And so it is with this cultivation of mindful awareness that I can begin to consider that the socks on the floor is just a trigger, that it triggers this old emotion, and that puts me into this ruminative path, which is a pattern for me. But if I can pause and I can stop myself even for a moment and say, is this true? Or is this helpful? And then by pausing and considering it in this way, then I have this opportunity to think about it a little bit differently, to say actually that things are okay in this present moment. And this gives me the flexibility then to meet my son at the place where he is today. And so you may have experienced this yourself. You wake up and you're feeling quite fatigued, you didn't sleep well, and you quickly move into a place that doesn't serve you, of worry, of judgment of yourself. And so it's difficult, but with awareness, we can begin to meet this a little bit differently. And so what I'd like to do now is just to introduce you to the idea of the hand model of the brain. This is a model that's introduced by Dan Siegel. And you can find certainly a more in-depth discussion of this, but his idea is that if you can begin to see the structures of the brain, to consider the structures of the brain and how they work, then we have this potential to intervene in a way that can interrupt these cycles that may not be serving us well. And so if you want to try this handy model of the brain, we begin by holding our hand. And what happens is your wrist and arm represent the spinal cord. And so we're getting information from the body. And so we often think that the mind is contained within the head, but actually we know that there are neurons also in the gut. And you might have known this with this perception that we have this gut feeling, and around the heart. So it's not only the mind brain, but also the heart brain and the gut brain. Okay. And so we get information through the spinal cord. And then at the base of the skull, which is represented by our palm, this lower part of our palm, is the brainstem. And this is the oldest part of the brain. So this is the part that is the fight, flight, freeze. This part that we know is active in responding to the fear flight that we use on the savannah, so continually scanning. And on top of that, if we move our thumbs across, and really it would be two thumbs, but we only have one thumb. So it's the thumb, and this is our limbic region. And this is the place where emotions and arousal arise. So the information comes in, fight, flight, freeze, and then the emotions are integrated with this. And it's these two areas particularly that respond to threat, whether it's perceived or imagined. And then on top of that, if we fold our hands over, that's our cortex. So our brain kind of sits like this. And that's our cortex. And that's the place that's the part of the brain, the newest part of the brain that makes us makes us human. It's the part where we perceive things, where we can relate to things, where we make integration, where we integrate information, and where we make maps of our world. And these two areas in the front, particularly, kind of the knuckles of the middle two fingers, if we look, we see that they connect directly with the limbic system and with the spinal cord. And it's with this area that we can integrate what's coming in with this desire to fight, fright, or flee, with the associated emotion, perhaps of fear or worry, so that we can bring on the knowledge that we have from our cortex, what we've perhaps experienced in the past, and integrate the situation. So that's the integrative part of our brain. And so in considering this model, what happens is we perceive a threat, real or imagined. So if we saw a snake, for example, which is a common, at least for me, but it's broader than that, a common threat. And so in the seeing of the snake, we have this direct arousal, right? And there's fear, the emotion would be fear. And what happens with that is we flip our lid. And in that moment, we no longer have this capacity to say, oh, it's a garter snake. I was expecting it here, right? But in the moment when the perceived threat is there, that's not available to us. But if we're able to pause, perhaps return to our breath, to this place of calm, as we've mentioned with the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, or with naming it, oh, fear's here, or that's just a snake. In the naming of that, we bring our cortex back online. We're able to use the experience we have. Oh, this won't hurt me. I've seen this before. And we integrate that function, and that rapid rate, this desire to run, is quieted. And so that can happen as well in a perceived threat. So for example, we may have an appointment, for example, a follow-up with our oncologist, and perhaps we didn't sleep that well, and on the way we noticed that the traffic was harder than was busier than we had anticipated. Now we're running a little late. And so we may already be feeling a little bit agitated in this area, a little bit hyped up. And then we're waiting in the waiting room, and we see the nurse walk by, but she doesn't acknowledge us. And so that, if we perceive that as a threat, we make up our stories because we have this tendency to fill in missing information. We can perceive that as a threat, and we flip our lid, and we begin to interpret things from a place of fear. Here, blah, 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 okay? But if in that moment we can identify, oh, that fear is here, or that concern is here, that gives us this capacity to bring our cortex, this organizational part of our brain, back online. And what the neuroscience is telling us, it's one of the important findings of what might be effective in mindfulness, is that it is this ability to emotionally regulate. So if I can bring my emotions back on track, not to be as reactive into a cycle of thinking that is not helpful to me. Again, we're asking this question, is this useful? Fear is here, bring it back on. It improves my cognitive flexibility, allowing me to consider other perspectives. Oh, perhaps she didn't see me. Oh, I'll see her in a moment. I don't know that to be true, and allows us to be present in the moment, not into the perceived future, which might not be helpful to us. And so that's how that can work, okay? So I'm just going to read you a short story that I think illustrates this well. So again, I'll just invite you to listen. One recent student of mindfulness was a young Army lieutenant who had been remanded to an 8-week class of mindfulness training by his commanding officer because of his inability to control his temper. After about 6 weeks of learning the practice of mindfulness and bringing a kind and compassionate attention to his experience, he found himself in a hurry, shopping at a local supermarket on his way home one evening. The market was crowded, and the checkout lines were long. He had a full cart and noticed that the woman in front of him had only one item in her basket. The lieutenant was the kind of person who wanted things to be done right. She was in the wrong line. She was supposed to be in the express line. Worse than that, she was carrying a baby in her arms. And when she got up to the checkout clerk, she held the baby up and the clerk began to coo and talk to the woman about the baby. And then the woman handed the baby across the counter so that the clerk could hold him. A long line of people was waiting. The annoyance the lieutenant had been feeling built to a point where he was about to lose control and say something in anger to the woman. But after 6 weeks of training in mindful awareness, a part of him became aware that he had been triggered. The lieutenant decided to use this as an opportunity to bring some of the mindfulness and attention practice he'd been learning. Bringing his attention, he began to experience a sense of spaciousness and release from his feelings of being overcome by strong emotions. He did not push the irritation away. Rather, he became aware of the anger, and by honoring it and accepting it, he felt enough of a release from the strong emotion to notice the waves of pain and heat and energy that were and judgment that were filling his body. And after taking a few more deep breaths, he felt a kindness begin to flood him and surround his pain and suffering until they slowly diminished. As he became filled with compassion, he looked up and realized that even though the woman was chattering and holding up the line, the child was cute and that the three of them seemed to be enjoying this pleasant moment. And so when he got to the checkout, he was calmed down enough to say graciously, "That was kind of a cute kid, wasn't it?" And the checkout clerk looked up at him and said, "Oh, do you think so? He's my boy. You see, my husband was in the army and he was killed in the Middle East last year. Now I have to work and my mom stays home to take care of him. And she tries to bring him in once a day so I can see him." And so we see that this story illustrates to us how we make up these stories about the way things we want, the way we want things to be. And when things aren't that way, or we perceive them to be other than they are, painful emotions are triggered. And then we might imagine with this soldier how the story might have ended. If we think about our hand model. And by naming that, and by attending once again to his breath, bringing that to a quieter place, he was able to bring his cortex back online and to actually see the situation differently. So instead of it being about irritation about him, to extend that compassion, not only for the triggered feelings he was having for himself, but also to the mom, her mom, and the baby in front of him. And that situation ended up very differently than it might have otherwise done. And so what I'm in considering this and how you might take this away for you in a way that could be helpful, BC approach model to difficult emotions. And so what the soldier did first was the idea is that we have to attend to what's going on. And so just taking note when we're in a situation where perhaps we're feeling triggered of what's going on with me right now, what thoughts are here, what emotions, what body sensations, and not needing to push them away, but attending to them. This is what's here for me right now. These are conditioned. It's not my fault that they're coming up. But then to have this opportunity to slow it down perhaps and to breathe, maybe name it. So as we say, we're aware of it, perhaps this idea that I'm going to be triggered. But in naming it and breathing, bringing my cortex back on. And then we have the opportunity to choose. So in this situation, we see that the soldier, although his inclination was to act in anger, by attending to his emotions, by connecting with his breath, by naming it and bringing his wiser self online, he was able to choose to actually interact, to see the situation differently, and to act. And this is the power of mindfulness. Okay, this is what it allows us to do. So it doesn't mean that we won't be aware of these powerful feelings. Indeed, we may be more aware of them initially, but it provides the opportunity to respond to them in a different way, to a way that is more in keeping with our deeper intentions. Okay, and so mindfulness in the 8-week mindfulness programs, or in the development of a mindfulness practice, we begin with the single pointed focus, with this return, with this exercise of the muscle. But we also then have this other opportunity to choose where we place our attention. And that too is important. And so where we choose to place our attention is variable. And it may speak also to our experience and to what is important to us. But I thought it might be useful to actually look to the pandemic during times of stress. And so considering resilience, what allows us to be resilient in the place of stress. So resilience is the ability of an individual to respond to stress in a healthy and adaptive way, such that personal goals are achieved at minimal personal and psychological cost. And so as with cancer, with a cancer diagnosis, with living with cancer or the memory of cancer, we are faced with real and imagined dangers, okay? But also with the possibility of knowing that things are okay in this moment. And this is true of the pandemic. So it's not as though these things are not to be feared, but that we don't always have to act out of this place of fear, that there is some choice on how to meet these difficult emotions, difficult thoughts, and the body sensations that can sometimes be triggered. And so what the crisis researchers, one model that the crisis researchers have put forth is this idea of the 3 core principles of resilience, or the 3 C's model, which is control, coherence, and connection. And so control is the belief that personal resources can be accessed to achieve during valued goals. And what this is really referring to is the idea that you have some control over the situation, that there is a capacity for you to control the present moment in a way that can be effective for you. And that might be small things, taking care of yourself, exercise, eating well. It could be in terms of the news media that you choose to tap into. So you may find that a continual attraction to a news feed, for example, actually instills fear. And so you may choose to control that in a way. Okay. Or it may be that you choose to consider your longer term goals. What is it that I'm hoping to do after the pandemic? What are celebrations that have as we consider control in terms of our ABC model, I can be aware that my emotions are not serving me well, perhaps that I'm feeling overwhelmed, extremely anxious, or very sad. Acknowledging that, reconnecting with your breath, pausing, and then with practice, considering where you might move your attention to a place that can better serve you. Perhaps it's going for a walk, perhaps it's creating something, okay? But this idea that you can take some control. The second C is coherence, which describes this deeply human desire to make sense and meaning of the world. And really, it's about the sense of what is meaningful in your life. And mindfulness is helpful in a couple of ways in this. Again, in terms of the ABC model, what's going on with me, reconnecting with the breath, and then choosing, but also in the discernment, in the discovery of what is most meaningful to you, okay? So in the words of Viktor Frankl, and this is that life is never made unbearable by circumstance, but only by the lack of meaning and purpose. And so what the crisis researchers found to be true in people who were able to make their way through times of other pandemics, of natural disaster, was this idea of having a greater purpose in life, okay? So that I am not confined to the present moment, but that if I can attend to those things that are important to me, whether that be another person, my family, whether that be to a cause that is important to me, whether that be to my career. But if I can discern what is meaningful to me, what my purpose is, and attend here, as opposed to getting caught up in the minutia of things that are unimportant in the bigger scheme, that will help me to build resilience. And support. And this is something that has been initially may seem limited, during the pandemic as we are asked to shelter at home. But we can also be connected with people in this way, through telephone, through the internet, and we can feel grateful that this is the time that we're in right now when we have this available to us. Unlike the times during, for example, the Spanish flu, when people were unable to connect with each other in this way. So connection means reaching out to other people with a sense of compassion and kindness, that we're in this together. But connection also means connecting with yourself, to recognize that you can direct some compassion towards yourself. And this is actually going to be the topic of next week's webinar. But the idea that we are in this together, but that their fear is real, that concern is real, but I don't need to only live again from that place. And that with this deeper understanding that these are common feelings, that I don't need to judge myself for having them. And that indeed with allowing myself some compassion, again, I can calm my emotional reactivity and bring on these other cognitive skills. And so in summary, oops, I may not be able to do that. Again, I might just encourage you to consider what mindfulness really is, that it's really about a way of being in the world. It's not about becoming a better meditator, but it's really about cultivating awareness and intention, that we can learn to respond instead of react to difficult emotions, experiences, and thoughts. And that by introducing this ABC model of awareness, of attention to the breath, of pausing and then choosing how you choose to proceed, that there can be enhanced emotional wellness. And that finally, as you choose in this ability to then respond to the situation, that considering what might be under your control, to consider what might be most meaningful to you, and then also considering how you might connect with other people or with yourself, more deeply with yourself, can add to your ability to be resilient and to make your way through. And so that's where we'll end. And so I'll open it up to questions, I guess, if you have any.
So thank you so much, Alison, for that such an insightful talk and discussion. I know everyone on board who was joining us today, I'm sure they found that very helpful. And just as a reminder, there is the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you do have any questions, we'll leave some time right now if you do want to type out anything, maybe any strategies that you're interested in learning about, or questions that might be on your mind, things that Alison covered, or things that you're curious to know about. Please feel free to let us know. So we'll just maybe give it a minute or two just to see if we do have any questions that come in, and go from there. And I guess while we wait, Alison, I can ask you one question that is on my mind. For mindfulness, is there one primary strategy that you yourself use at times when, I know you did mention that example of when you see maybe your son's clothes on the floor, you kind of just your brain just goes on a complete tirade of thoughts itself. But when there are circumstances when you can feel yourself getting, I guess, just lost in the possible negative thoughts and just the unnecessary, I guess, is there a strategy that you use to keep yourself grounded?
Such a great question. Yeah, for sure. So one of the practices or combined practice that I've found very useful is when I'm aware that I'm being triggered in this way. And for me, that often presents with kind of a welling up the front and into my chest. Now that I'm aware of that sensation, I often ask myself, is this useful? So is this thought useful? It is just a thought, right? And so we begin to experience the thoughts, like sounds, come and go, okay? And so I know it's just a thought. And so in that moment, I ask myself, is this true? Okay, is this helpful? Right? And then in being able to evaluate that, I can then make that decision as to how I want to react to that thought or how I want to respond to that thought. Do I want to let it go? Or is it something that I need to engage in? And so I found that that question alone has been, well, not alone, but in combination with a lifetime of practice, has been very, very powerful to me. Is this useful? Because what I've discovered is that most often it's not. I really don't know all of those things. And you begin to see patterns in the way you think. Okay. And then maybe related to that is a way of bringing myself back to the moment. So feet on the floor has been very helpful to me. Feet on the floor. Because in that moment, it takes me, if only for a second, out of these ruminative patterns into the present moment. Feet on the floor. It's that pause that then allows me to say, is this useful? Thanks.
Okay, that is very, very helpful. I know for me, especially too, because I have a tendency to get lost in those thoughts, and I'm sure it's helpful for everyone as well. So we do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So we have one member that let us know that I'm here with my son. He is a teenager that has some reactive behaviors at school. So I believe this will be really helpful for us. Do you know any other resources for preteens and teens, either for him directly or for me as a mother to be able to help?
Also a great question from two perspectives. Okay, so yes, in terms of a program for your son or more experience with this kind of an approach, Eileen Beltzner is going to be doing this session next week on mindfulness-based self-compassion, and Eileen offers a program for teens. It's online now, so it's easily accessible. And so you can look her up directly. It's Beltzner, Beltzner. I think you can Google her, but if not, she's doing the part 2 of this session next week. Okay, so that's part 1. Yes, there is, and also that yes, helping your son to develop these, cultivate these capacities to be a little bit more reactive are extremely helpful. But also you taking it on as well to understand, so that there is a meeting of the minds, and so that you can help each other as you cultivate these practices together is extremely beneficial, because we know that it's our interactions between each other that often have this huge power.
Thank you for that. And so just another question. These are questions that I can address because they're more so, I guess, admin. But for those of you who you did find it difficult to take notes, I'm not sure if we can provide the content. That is up to Alison. But I can tell you the session is recorded, so you will be able to access it online and go through the slides and what Alison is saying to refresh your memory as well. So in case you weren't able to take notes, that's not a problem. You can feel free to check that out once it is posted online, just to stay current with the information. And another question there was, is there an actual 8-week course on mindfulness with Wellspring? So I don't believe there is. We don't have an 8-week course on mindfulness specifically. Maybe that is something that I can bring back to the team to see if there is a specific program that we can look into. We do have the meditation workshops that cover some aspects of mindfulness, but I don't believe we have something dedicated entirely to mindfulness.
I have a so yeah, so you can, if you choose. So I have offered mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for cancer at Wellspring, and although it's not a Wellspring program particularly, it was offered there. But if they are interested, I do hope to offer another online program beginning the end of October. And so for any participants who might be interested in a program such as this, you can contact me directly at Kelford, KELFORD, MD @gmail.com. And I can give you information about the program. It is a medically based OHIP covered program, so that can be available if that was something that could be of interest to you.
So thank you for that. I actually, I just typed in the email address. I hope I got that correct, kelfordmd@gmail.com. I put that in the chat. So if anyone is interested in reaching out to Alison, her email is in the chat. So you can feel free to reach out about that program as well. And so back to the other questions. Is there any technique to bring my wandering thoughts to focus on the present?
So at a beginning, there are many techniques, and it kind of depends on what you find most useful. So through the 8-week program, what we do is we introduce you to a variety of practices through the 8 weeks. If it's available to you, the breath is often a good place to start, because the breath is always with you. It changes. Every breath is a little bit different, and so you can bring some curiosity to that. And so the breath can often be a good place to begin. However, if for some reason the breath isn't accessible to you, you can actually attend to sensations, for example, in the feet or in the hands. If you prefer to move, sometimes the movement of the body can bring that place, be that place where you bring your attention. And in moving it out of this ongoing set of thoughts, it allows you to then quiet the mind a little bit and to have an attention in a different place. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. Can you give, next question, can you give an example of how to have a regular practice that can help you improve with time? And if there is maybe a recommended time frame for how long a practice should take, how many times a day, or is there a recommendation for that, or is that, I guess, more
Such a great
personal?
question. So this is one of the things that is being studied. So we call that the dose response. So even in the programs that we run, afterwards, it seems that some people after an 8-week program will meditate every day for, a period of time. Other people only meditate maybe on the weekends when their time allows. And really what the most recent evidence is showing us is that there doesn't seem to be a clear dose effect. If I meditate for 20 minutes every day, then I will be less reactive. And so it seems to be a combination of factors that are responsible for the now documented effect of mindfulness, mindfulness-based meditation. And so what the most recent evidence seems to be suggesting is that it's this ability to see your thoughts as thoughts, what is known as decentering, that seems to be advantageous in the benefits that we see with mindfulness, as well as the ability to what they call increase your emotional distress. So that has to do with this idea that when you feel agitated, or if we're thinking about this hand model of the brain, when I start to feel that things are percolating, I've been triggered a little bit, if I can stay with that for a little bit, if I can say, oh yeah, my heart's pounding, I feel a little bit of tightness in my chest, if I can be with that distress, with that physical distress, as I learn to be with it, not needing to run away from it or to freeze down, I will notice that this too passes, and that it's that this ability to tolerate the emotional distress that allows me to say things are okay. And I don't immediately go into this ruminative pattern like, oh, this is going to happen, something bad's going to happen, that feeds it. And so I don't have to marinate, as they say, in these difficult feelings. So it seems to be decentering and increased tolerance for emotional distress that seem to be beneficial. The other benefits are related to if I'm not as reactive, it improves emotional regulation, so I don't fly off the handle, I don't flip my lid as often. Then it allows for cognitive flexibility. If I'm not as busy dealing with these racing thoughts, using all my emotions there, then I have this increased capacity to be flexible in my thinking. What else might be going on here? Okay, and so this seems to be, these are what seem to be the important components. A long answer to your question, but we really don't know what the dose is. Okay, but we know that it's the practice of meditation that allows us to develop these skills that seem to be important. At least that's where the research is right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And so it looks like we might have time for one last question before we do wrap up for today. How can you use a practice to help you deal with difficult people who may not have any compassion or awareness?
That's also a good question. So I think one of the important reminders is that the only people's emotions you can control, of course, are your own. And so being aware of what is being triggered in you. So acknowledging that, saying, yes, hurt is here, disappointment is here, sadness is here, whatever the emotion might be. So recognizing the body sensation, recognizing the emotion, and naming it, again, allows you to bring your frontal cortex back on. So that in doing so, you are less reactive. So if someone is triggering you, you are less likely to give it back to them, which can, create this spiral of a difficult relationship. So first, that can happen. So just in the decreased reactiveness, if you are not reacting to the trigger, they're less likely to be reacting to your trigger. But also in bringing it on, you can connect with what your deepest intention is, okay? So my intention is to be kind, or my intention is to be compassionate, even if that's not possible for the other person. And sometimes this is the interrelatedness of mindfulness. And sometimes in being in this way, slowly over time, you begin to see it reflected in the other person as well. And so it's really about how you meet the moment. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. So I think that about wraps up our session for today. Alison, I just want to say thank you again for the discussion that you had and for taking the time to answer all of these questions and for sharing your knowledge with the Wellspring community. And for those of you who were joining us today, I do thank you for your time and your patience with us during the entire session. And I think with that, we will wrap it up. And I do hope you tune in next time. On the 16th, there's part 2 of this mindfulness series. So I hope that that helps you add on another layer to the mindfulness series and to take away a lot more information for your own habits or patterns, just your lifestyle in general. So I do thank everyone today for joining us today. And I wish you a great rest of your week. And thank you once again, Alison.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.